This is The Week in Addiction Medicine, a podcast resource of timely news and top stories brought to you by the American Society of Addiction Medicine, ASAM.
Today is Tuesday, January 20th, and I'm Zach Caruso. Our lead story this week is in Science and is titled, Did the Illicit Fentanyl Trade Experience a Supply Shock? In the United States, overdose deaths, or ODDs, from synthetic opioids peaked in mid-2023 and then began a sharp decline, decreasing by over one-third by the end of 2024. One possible explanation is a decrease in fentanyl supply. The purity of fentanyl powder rose in 2022, cresting at 25% in early 2023, but by the end of 2024, purity had fallen to 11%. From 2019 to 2024, the rate of ODDs correlated with the purity of fentanyl in both powder and pills. Drug seizures also peaked in early 2023 and then decreased by 37% in 2024. Analysis of Reddit posts by drug users found increased mentions of drought in 2023 that remained high at the end of 2024. All these indicators suggest a reduction in fentanyl supply beginning in 2023. In 2023, China took aggressive action against suppliers of synthetic opioid precursor chemicals, likely a result of meetings between President Biden and Xi. This suggests international cooperation can help reduce ODDs. Next is an article in the Journal of Addiction Medicine titled Trends in U.S. Methamphetamine-Related Mortality by Census Division, 2005 to 2023. Using the CDC wide-ranging online data for epidemiologic research dataset, this study identified methamphetamine-related deaths among U.S. residents age 15 or older from 2005 to 2023 and calculated mortality rates over time for the 9 U.S. Census divisions. From 2005 to 2023, methamphetamine-related deaths increased substantially across all 9 U.S. Census divisions, although with variability between regions. The highest mortality rates in 2023 were in the Pacific, East, South Central, and Mountain divisions of the country. Our next article is in Addiction and is titled Estimating Thresholds for Risk of Cannabis Use Disorder Using Standard Delta-9 THC Units. This study analyzed data from the Canteen study, a 12-month observational longitudinal dataset of adult and adolescent cannabis users in London to assess the association between quantity of THC and risk of cannabis use disorder, or CUD. The enhanced cannabis timeline followback was used to determine standard THC units. CUD diagnosis and severity was assessed via the mini international neuropsychiatric interview. The study found that THC units provided a good discrimination from no CUD from any CUD, with a risk threshold of 8.26 units per week in adults and 6.04 units per week for adolescents. Next is an article in the Journal of Addiction Medicine and is titled Maternal Opioid-Related Diagnosis in Pregnancy and Risk of Adverse Perinatal Outcomes. This study of perinatal outcomes associated with opioid use during pregnancy linked data from California vital statistics and hospital discharge data from 2008 to 2020. Out of over 5 million pregnancies, 13,000 had an opioid-related diagnosis, and the prevalence more than doubled from 0.14% in 2008 to 0.33% in 2020. Individuals with this diagnosis had a higher incidence of hypertension, opioid overdose, and preterm birth. The risk of serious maternal morbidity was higher with opioid use. In offspring, death during the first year was more common. NICU admission was more common. There were similar increased risks for respiratory distress syndrome, small for gestational age, hypoglycemia, and major anomalies. Opioid-related diagnosis during pregnancy was associated with significantly increased maternal and neonatal morbidity. Next is an article in the Harm Reduction Journal titled Harm Reduction Engagement and Ongoing Opioid Use Among Adults Receiving Methadone or Buprenorphine in Philadelphia. Individuals receiving MOUD may continue to use non-prescribed opioids and benefit from harm reduction services, or HRS. Researchers interviewed patients receiving methadone or buprenorphine and found that overall, 37% reported non-prescribed opioid use in the prior 6 months and 61% used HRS at least once. There was no difference in non-prescribed opioid use between the methadone and buprenorphine groups, but the buprenorphine group was more likely to report using, recommending, and feeling welcome at HRS sites. The authors note these differences in use and perception about HRS may be related to differences in treatment settings for methadone and buprenorphine and tailoring HRS interventions to these settings. Next is an article in JAMA Psychiatry titled Yoga for Opioid Withdrawal and Autonomic Regulation. This randomized clinical trial assessed if yoga as adjuvant therapy can accelerate opioid withdrawal recovery and improve autonomic regulation in patients with opioid use disorder. Of 59 male participants with opioid use disorder, those receiving yoga alongside standard buprenorphine treatment achieved withdrawal stabilization 4.4 times faster than controls and showed significant improvements in heart rate variability, anxiety, sleep, and pain measures. Yoga significantly enhanced opioid withdrawal recovery through measurable autonomic and clinical improvements, supporting its integration into withdrawal protocols as a neurobiologically informed intervention. Our next article is in Addiction and is titled, Are Americans Sobering Up? New Trends in Alcohol Consumption in the United States. Emerging but inconclusive data suggest moderate recent declines in alcohol use and binge drinking among U.S. adults, notably ages 35 to 50, with similar patterns in some European countries. Potential drivers include economic pressures, increased awareness of health risks even at moderate intake, post-COVID shifts in social behavior, and possibly changing patterns of cannabis use, though substitution remains unproven. Even in the context of falling alcohol consumption, alcohol remains the cause of substantial preventable morbidity and mortality. The need persists for continuing screening, treatment of alcohol use disorder, evidence-based health communication, and consideration of effective policies such as higher alcohol taxation. Our final article is in Pharmacological Research and is titled The Addicted Brain: How Processed Foods Hijack Reward Pathways. In this paper, authors discuss ultra-high processed foods, or UPF, as an addictive substance, including how it can alter the reward pathways and lead to behavior like other substance use disorders. Authors review the clinical addiction framework and the associated neurobiological and behavioral changes that occur with substance use disorders. There is preclinical evidence that UPF consumption induces changes similar to other SUDs, including acting on reward pathways inducing dopamine release and dysregulation of the mesolimbic dopamine system, binge behavior, and even withdrawal. The authors note that while understanding of food addiction has improved, more research is needed. This concludes today's episode of This Week in Addiction Medicine. Remember to subscribe to the ASAM Weekly for more exclusive content and our editor's commentary delivered every Tuesday. Be sure to check us out on social media and at asam.org. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.